Well, folks, we're back with another Festival of Legends card review, and we got a bunch of legendaries this time. Druid, couple Hunter legendaries, Rogue, and we're kicking it off here with Zoc, Fog Snout, a new 7-mana 6/6 Quillbore. Battlecry summon 2 1/1 Quillbore with Taunt, and that's improved by your hero attack and armor gained this turn. And that's going to be the stats that increment up. And it looks like to me, based on the reveal video, that if you gain like 3 attack, it's going to gain 3 attack on the minions. And if you gain like 3 armor, it's going to gain 3 health on the minions. So it looks like they're upgrading separately. So it's not like if you gain, 5 and 5, they're not going to be like, plus 10, plus 10. They're going to be plus 5, plus 5, which... as you're going to see, we've got a few cards here to help out. There's some stuff that's going to make your hero power stronger with the Free Spirit and the Groovy Cats, plus, of course, other ways to gain armor or attack in Druid. You've got things like Chitinous Plating even. You can kind of play the turn before. That's going to give these like plus 4 health going into your Zoc turn, basically for free or whatever. So, yeah, so basically you play Zoc, with all this stuff together, you may be going to get some like 5/5, 6/6s. I guess it's possible to get even bigger, but it's going to get pretty hard to get above, somewhere in the middle range there. 5/5 to 7/7, I would say, feels like the peak. And I think actually in a lot of scenarios they're going to be even smaller. I think sometimes they're going to be like awkward, like 4 2s and like 2 5s and stuff. So ultimately, for 7 mana, you're getting 3 bodies with a little bit of defensive utility. I gotta be honest, I think this is coming down really late in the game for that. It's 7 mana already, but it's not really 7 mana because you gotta do things like hero power alongside it. And we're gonna see these cards that do make your hero power a lot stronger, and getting to a 5/5 hero power is definitely possible, in which case, the Zoc is kind of a 9 mana, gain 5 attack, 5 armor, and summon 3 6/6s, which... for 9 mana, man, I don't know. That feels pretty late for that. And it is Druid, so you can get it down a little sooner. But if you're playing all these things to make your hero power better, I don't know how much time you're going to have to ramp. Really, ultimately, I think a lot of times, if you want this to be actually full strength, it might have to come down on like turn 12 or 14 or something, just so that you've had time for these other cards to get played and drawn and so on. Like you got to find them and play them and kill them off to really make your Zoc better. Now, there are other cards that juice Zoc up a little bit, but because it's this turn, boy, it actually feels like it's just going to take so much work to get this guy going, and I don't think the Quillbores scale up fast enough. If they each gained like full stats per attack and armor, like if 5 attack and 5 armor added 10/10 to the minions like we talked about, that would really help. That would really make this card much more threatening and a more significant defensive wall, I think, against aggro decks. But ultimately, as it stands right now, man, there's a lot of investment required, it looks like, to make Zoc even moderately interesting, and he doesn't even get exciting, I don't think, at that stage. I'll say, like we've said in every video, in these 4-set metas, fresh after rotation, onboard plays like these kind of stat dumps do tend to work a little bit better, but I don't even think these are as fast as some of the ones we saw like in previous metas that were stat dumps. Compare this to like Colossals, or even go back to like the Watchtower guy in Forts in the Barrens, right? I feel like even he was kind of a similar card, and he got played a little bit, if you guys remember, until some stuff got nerfed. So I don't know, man. Zoc feels like he's coming down really late and not making a big enough swing or immediate impact when he does, and requires a lot of investment to get there. So this card to me looks pretty clunky. So next up here, let's talk about the Free Spirit. This is quite some artwork here. This is a 1 mana 1/2 undead beast with Battlecry and Death Rattle. Your hero power gains 1 more armor this game. So of course, this is a pretty cool tool. Like, this alone is gonna up your hero power by 2 armor, making it gain 3 armor by default, which is already pretty nice. And then if you play a second one of these, you're going up to 5 armor on your hero power. Like, I really like that a lot. And these are really cheap to weave in as well. So that's pretty nifty. This also has some undead synergies. We did see some like undead token stuff teased. I don't really know that the armor gain probably complements an undead token strategy much, so I don't know if this has a lot of value there, but definitely something to keep in mind. But man, just throwing these down early and getting this awesome hero power. You don't love hero power in Hearthstone necessarily, right? Sometimes it's nice to have that free resource, free play. But typically hero powers aren't really very high value, but man, after this, and in particular after the Groovy Cat as well, suddenly you're going to be talking about like a 5/5 hero power dealing 5 damage and gaining 5 armor. That is absolutely worth 2 mana. So if you're doing this, it makes your hero power this really nice play. Suddenly you're getting this resource free, 5 attack and 5 armor. That is really swinging in some matchups. That's just going to either whittle people down, or, in an aggro race game plan, honestly, like if you're healing 5, the opponent's going to have a hard time burning you down while you're still dealing 5 really effectively. So I love this style of play. It might be a little too slow to get online, and if you don't hit all of your hero power boosts, maybe you need that critical mass to make it feel really good. In other words, like, is 3/3 good enough? Or is maybe like 1/5 good enough? Like, do you have to have both the attack and the armor to make it feel worth it? Or is alternatively, is 3/3 good enough? I don't know, right? It feels like you kind of need all the pieces together to make it really feel worth it. But I would love to just start hero powering for 5/5 every single time. That sounds really, really fun. So here's the Groovy Cat. This is the other piece of that puzzle. 2 mana, 2/1 beast here. Battle Grind, Death Rattle. Your hero power gives your hero 1 more attack this game. So again, running 2 of these naturally, that would be 4 additional attack, pushing it up to 5. This one at 2 mana, a little slower, of course, a little harder to weave in, but still not typically tough for Druid to just get some plays down early and start advancing this game plan. So, you're talking about spending 6 mana to get this crazy hero power. Probably not going to hit all 4 of these early in the game all that often. But nonetheless, I'm intrigued. Just, is hero powering going to feel too problematic until you get that up there? And are these too big of a sacrifice until you get that hero power juiced up? Like, is it just taking too long to get all of that online? I think that's the risk for these cards. But I'm kind of biased towards liking these a lot. I don't know that Zoc is really a sufficient payoff, but I like this style of play a bunch. I think ultimately it will end up being too slow, if I'm being like really honest. I think it'll take too long to get online, and then even then, perfect case scenario, it's not that crazy high output. So probably not good. I'm kind of talking myself out of this as we go. It feels slow, but man, I really want to enjoy it. These cards look super fun to me. So next up here we have Spread the Word. This is kind of the final piece of the Druid puzzle here, it looks like. This is a 4 mana spell, draw 2 cards, and costs 1 less for each attack your hero has. Now notably, this one's just based on attack, unlike Zoc, which is both attack and armor. So this stands out a little bit there. That said, Druid does have some other attack gaining sorts of cards, not just hero powers in this case. And, this gets efficient pretty fast. I don't think Arcane Intellect is really the kind of marker these days for success for these sorts of cards. So I don't think 3 mana feels good, but 2 mana definitely still feels good. So as soon as you're getting, I think, 2 attack, and you're happy to have gained that 2 attack, then Spread the Word becomes a pretty efficient card draw play for Druid. And I think certainly it lines up nicely with these other Druid cards and this kind of package. So moving over to Rogue here, we've got MC Blingtron. Blingtron's back. Fun new legendary card here, and I actually think this card looks really, really good. I've seen a lot of mixed takes on this card already in the last hour or 2 since it's been revealed. Some people think it's just a really expensive Void Touched Attendant for, the Priest card there. Other people think it's completely busted. I land a little closer to the busted side. I don't think completely busted, but we're going to talk through all the nuance of this card because I think there's a lot to break down in this one. Blingtron here is a 5 mana 3/4 mech, as he was, I think, in the past. And Battlecry, both players equip 1/2 microphones. Your opponents increases all damage they take by 1. So you get the base golden microphone here, and your opponent gets the broken microphone, which has that Void Touched Attendant effect. But it is, importantly, not symmetrical. It is only for your opponent. And beyond that, in many, many cases, they're going to have it for 2 turns because you're going to give them the microphone with Blingtron. You're going to have the rest of that turn to deal damage to their face. And then if they do not have a way to play a fresh weapon over the top of the microphone, then they're going to have a second turn with the microphone as well because they can only attack once. It has 2 durability. So you're probably, in many scenarios, going to get 2 turns with that microphone. Of course, if they can play a weapon, that changes, but a lot of decks just don't have access to weapons necessarily. And then on top of that, even sometimes forcing your opponent to play a weapon. Like if you're playing Blingtron and you're going face and you're like entering a phase of the game where you're trying to kill your opponent and you're like making them spend like 3 mana on a weapon they don't want to play just to get rid of their microphone, that might still be a net gain for you, because the weapon they're playing probably doesn't have a lot of value or relevance in a given game state where you're trying to kill your opponent in the next turn or two. So it's almost like a Lotheb effect or something, where if they want to protect themselves from the microphone, they have to waste a bunch of mana in order to do that. So I think this actually offers a ton of really powerful setup because of the fact that it's non-symmetrical and over 2 turns. And yes, it is more expensive than a Void Touch Attendant, but that Void Touch Attendant can be cleared. It can be dealt with. And sometimes that Void Touch Attendant can actually punish you on the return swing by being a symmetrical effect. I've had moments where I've killed the opponent because they played a Void Touch Attendant, and it gave me a bunch of extra damage, particularly in an aggro v aggro matchup. So the asymmetry here on the microphone, I think, is actually a really important factor. Now, beyond that, MC Blingtron has another upside where you can actually just use this to destroy your opponent's weapon, much like we saw with Blingtron in the past. But in this case, you know you're giving them something absolutely awful for them. So it's a really great asymmetrical weapon swing and weapon removal card. That's not necessarily great at 5 mana. That's not the primary reason you're going to want to play this card, of course. That's kind of a backup plan, but on occasion that could offer some real upside where your opponent makes a crazy Draka weapon or something, and I just want to get rid of the Draka weapon, give them this garbage microphone instead. Although against Rogue, of course, the microphone has far reduced utility because they just have their hero power to overwrite the weapon. Not the best example, but you get the idea. If there's a scary weapon out there, this can overwrite it. So ultimately, I actually think this is pretty awesome. So the idea here, really, maybe you have a little bit of a board accrued. You have a couple minions that are able to attack. You slam down Blingtron. You send a little bit of damage face on this initial turn. You attack with your microphone, so that's like 2 damage right there. Couple minion attacks, few extra points of damage here off the broken microphone. Basically, the more you have, the better. Maybe you have a spell in hand too to send face, and then hopefully you're setting up for the next turn where you completely blow up your opponent, where you have like a full turn and they still have the microphone up, and you just start shipping a bunch of stuff face, basically, whether that's minion attacks or spells from hand. Hopefully you're just getting enough damage, that sets up kind of a lethal over 2 turns, and this becomes a bit of a finisher, almost like a bloodlust or something, but where you have a lot more control over it and you don't necessarily need minions on board to make it good. So I don't know, man. 5 mana is a lot for Rogue, to be fair, right? Like 5 mana is a pretty expensive card for Rogue. They can play a lot of things cheaper, but I think this offers that lethality setup to such a significant degree that they're going to be willing to do that. I also think that we've already got some scenarios with like the weapon for Rogue. We saw the instrument for Rogue that gives you that mana refresh. I think you could go into a 6-7 mana turn, maybe have a juiced up mana refresh weapon, play your Blingtron, that overwrites your weapon, activates that death rattle. You end up with 6 or 7 mana. They already have the broken microphone. You just start slamming face with a bunch of spells, and now your golden microphone can attack for damage. So I mean, it just feels like this offers a ton of lethality, and that's something that Rogue traditionally loves. So I mean, between the normal upsides, between the lethality here, between the awkwardness this can create, I feel like Blingtron's pretty good. I think this is going to be a really relevant finisher for Rogue. I like this card a lot. I think it's an oversimplification to say that this is a really expensive Void Touched Attendant. I think this card looks pretty dang good. So moving on for Rogue here, we have Harmonic Hip Hop, the harmonic/dissonant spell for Rogue. It's a 2 mana shadow spell, deals 1 damage, it gives your weapon +3 attack, and that swaps each turn. And now it'll give 3 damage and give your weapon +1 attack. So depending on what you've got going here, of course, the harmonic version could lead to more total damage if you've got like a fresh 2 durability weapon. This is effectively like adding 7 damage, for instance, just onto your base hero power weapon. You get the 1 right away, and then you get +3 twice. So that adds 7. Alternatively, with the Dissonant Hip Hop, if you use that to deal the 3 right away, then you're only going to get +2 attack. So it's kind of like 5 total damage. So theoretically, Harmonic Hip Hop can do more, especially the higher the durability of your weapon. But ultimately, sometimes that Dissonant Hip Hop might be more important, just sending that over the top to deal 3 damage. Maybe you use that against a minion or so on and so forth. So they're each going to have distinct and interesting utility, I think. But very often, Harmonic Hip Hop's probably going to feel like the right way to go. And I'll say this is a really efficient damage output sort of card. I mean, that 2 mana for 7 damage, for instance, is really nice. And decks that are looking to go face a lot, there you go. This is a great tool. And the fact that sometimes this can still go over the top, a la, you know, eviscerates and so on, feels good. Now, it's not going to have the same maybe efficiency of something like Wicked Stab, perhaps. Sometimes that could just like deal 6 late in the game. That was crazy, but maybe a little bit better damage if you set it up earlier. And of course, you don't have to wait till turn 10 to get like Wicked Stab's crazy output. So I think this will become a useful damage output tool in Rogue's typical damage output kit. This seems to fit in very nicely to me. So finally for Rogue here, we have the Mic Drop 3 mana spell. Draw 2 cards, finale, give your weapon +2 attack. So basically here we stuck a Deadly Poison and an Arcane Intellect together into a single card. And I gotta say, I'm actually a little bit less excited about this card than I think a lot of people have been. I think this is going to create a little more awkwardness than people realize. Number one, it's often best to draw cards early in a turn, at the start of your turn, when you're looking for stuff to do. In which case, it's going to be pretty hard to proc this finale for the +2 attack. And I don't think Rogue gets excited at all about a base Arcane Intellect, right? It's fine. Sometimes they'll play it, but Rogue has so many more efficient ways to draw cards. Concoctions in particular can do, you know, 4 cards for 3 mana, for instance. I just don't think Mic Drop is exciting in that case. I think you have to proc the finale here to feel good about this card at all. And even then, I'm not sure that feels that great. Like, yes, +2 attack is nice. That's like 4 damage effectively if you have your base hero power weapon up. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. If you knew the finale was going to go off every time, perhaps Mic Drop would feel pretty good. But I hate the fact that the card draw ends up being a little bit delayed. You're kind of saving it for later. Rogue can get around that, you know, with preps and stuff. They might still be able to play cards post card draw, even from 0 mana, but still a little bit awkward for Rogue. So as far as I'm concerned, this looks a little slow for Rogue, which it sounds crazy to say, I know sometimes, but it does feel that way to me. I think they have so many other great card draw options. I don't know that this makes the cut, even with this plus attack. Of course, if there's a really weapon-focused deck that cares a lot about attack value and has other ways to benefit from attack value, this card becomes more and more interesting in those cases. You know, for instance, we had kind of Poison Rogue stuff in the past. Maybe a Mic Drop would get played in that sort of deck. Or if there's a weapon that really benefits specifically from having extra attack via, whatever, lifesteal or something, then maybe Mic Drop makes more sense in those decks. But I think most Rogue decks will actually pass on Mic Drop in favor of just faster and more efficient card draw, because this one ultimately at 3 mana, it's a little hefty for Rogue. So next up here we have Mr. Mukla, 6 mana, 10/10. He's finally as big as his older brother. He's got Rush and Battlecry. Fill your opponent's hand with bananas. So a couple things happening here. Number one, this card's really big. 6 mana 10/10 is gigantic, and it's got Rush, so it's taking some immediate trades. That's good. I don't want to write off these gigantic stats. Like, he's really, really big. I do worry that stats matter a lot less as you get later into a game. Turn 6 is right around the point where I worry they don't make enough difference, and I do worry as well that a lot of board shapes aren't perfect for this. You know, like, oh man, they've got 3 3/3s. I need to trade into these 3/3s, and Mukla only kills one of them. Oh no, I'm just gonna die. Like, I think those scenarios are gonna happen a lot. Also, it's like, oh no, I'm giving them all these bananas. Those 3/3s are now like, 7/7 or something. So there's some real clunkiness there against aggro decks where I worry, like, is this really gonna help you stabilize it all? I don't really think so. So alternatively, we can look at the Battlecry here to assess some of the value on Mukla, and it does have some interesting applications. You're filling your opponent's hand, right? So that means that they're absolutely going to burn their next draw. And although burning cards in and of itself isn't always super valuable in Hearthstone, because you might burn something weak and help them find something awesome, this isn't just burning the card, it's also denying them the draw. So they are actually going -1 on resources in hand. And that is meaningful. That means they have less choice and less total stuff to work with. Now, you've given them some bananas to replace that resource. In some scenarios, that might be better for them. Like we talked about, if they have a couple 3/3s left over, they're just going to smack you with those bananas. Those bananas are going to help them fill in their curve really nicely. It's like, oh, I'm never floating mana again. I just toss a banana in with whatever kind of spare mana I have left over. So there are matchups and scenarios where that's going to be a real downside. The upside might be against like greedier, controllier decks that care more about resources or combo pieces. But then I think Mukla gets even more diminished value in those cases from a stat standpoint. Like, his stats probably aren't really as relevant in those matchups. Maybe if you've had a really aggressive start and then Mukla comes down as like the final threat and they just can't deal with this big 10/10, that's kind of cool in theory, but then I think I'd almost just rather run like damage cards if he's serving as a finisher of sorts. So I guess as I talk through all that, I don't know where Mukla lives or in which matchups he's supposed to succeed. I'm having trouble lining up when I really want to play this card and when I think he's going to be a home run. I feel like the downsides are pretty significant, and the upside here is all kind of baked into his stats and his rush, like his on-board impact. And I think that's just not going to be that valuable or impactful necessarily. So we're going to see some support cards here for like big beasts and stuff that kind of help a little, but I still really doubt this package collectively, as we're going to talk about a little more here. Oh, I should mention one more thing real quick. I've seen a bunch of people on Twitter talking about Barbaric Sorceress. So, give your opponent bananas and then swap the cost of a spell to 1 via the Barbaric Sorceress. And we're going to talk about Stranglethorn Heart as a big spell that would be pretty nuts at 1, of course. Listen, I get it. That's kind of sneaky good, but here's the deal. Mukla's a 1-of legendary, right? So you got to have this kind of perfect like Mukla into Sorceress line for this to work well. It still could technically whiff, of course. It's pretty likely to hit bananas if you're filling their hand with 5, 6, 7 bananas, whatever. But I don't know, man. That feels really iffy, and like you got to line it up perfectly. And even then, like, is the Stranglethorn Heart good by that stage? Because you've kind of played only maybe Mukla or something by then. It is like you got to wait a few more turns. We'll talk more about Stranglethorn Heart, but I just don't really see that coming together as a saving grace for Mukla. It's a fun idea. It's really creative. I didn't think of it, certainly, but that does not feel like a sort of thing that makes Mukla great. Just might occasionally be super fun, but the card still looks kind of average at best to me there. So next up is Stranglethorn Heart, new legendary 10 mana spell for Hunter. Beautiful artwork, man, just amazing. It's got tradable, which is great for big spells like this because you don't want to get this stuck in hand early. And it will resurrect all friendly beasts that cost 5 or more. And, we're going to see another big beast here with a Banjosaur, which is an easy 5-star card. Just because of its artwork, not its effect. We'll talk about it. So, there are some payoffs. You got like King Crush and stuff in here as well for the Stranglethorn Heart. And yeah, if you get to 10 mana and you've got a Stranglethorn Heart in hand and you've killed off a few big beasts, of course, I think that's going to feel like a great play. I think you're going to be really happy to just summon this board of awesome, scary, big dudes, and that's going to feel great. The hesitation I have with this card is getting to that point. Because number one, you have to get to 10 mana, which is not trivial. That alone is going to require some work. And you have to have played all of these big beasts on time. And you have to not be dead when you play these big beasts, right? And although, yeah, they have some rush and stuff, you're still committing your mana to a turn that is about board development. It's not about lethality, and it's not about defense. All of which feel like they might be really important to me when you're going into a like 10 mana turn that's so late in the game. Is your opponent just winding up to kill you, right? Is the game about to end? So it's really a question here about deck construction. Is Big Beast Hunter going to have the pieces necessary to succeed? I'm doubtful. We still have stuff like Harpoon Gun that can support that archetype, but they're losing a lot of interesting things as well, like the big Mountain Bear or whatever. That was one of the important defensive stabilizing tools. That goes away. These big beasts replacing that sort of stuff don't look as valuable in that regard to me. So I worry about the stabilization. I worry about the enablers a little bit, losing things like the Ram that can discount stuff. There are still, the Sunken City cards like Harpoon Gun and the Asharan Saber or whatever that can make some plays in that regard, I guess. But it's just like, is this deck still going to come together? I have some real doubts about that. I don't think the balance between like payoff and setup is really there. I don't think the payoffs are quite fast enough or good enough with these new beasts. And we're losing some of the setup as well. So, 10 mana is just a lot to ask, basically, for a card like this one. So, yeah, it's easy to picture those perfect scenarios, but it's also pretty easy to picture a lot of scenarios where I'm dead on turn 8 or whatever, and this card just never had the chance to make an impact. So that said, we got Big Dreams here, which could arguably help you cheat out some big stuff a little bit faster. This is a 5-mana spell. Summon the highest cost beast from your hand. It goes dormant for 2 turns. Of course, the Banjosaur might be the highest cost beast. You could maybe have a King Crush in here as well. But the real problem here is how slow this card is. It takes forever. You're skipping your turn 5, and you still have to wait even longer to get the beast back out. So, I mean, even with a King Crush, you save some mana, yes, but you are just passing the game to your opponent for so long, particularly for really big key turns like turn 5, right? That's where you really need to start making some significant plays. So to me, this just looks so dang expensive for what it does, so delayed in its payoff, and this does not help contribute, I think, to a Stranglethorn Heart deck at all. This just feels really bad. So finally here we have the Banjosaur. As I said, 5-star card, no matter what. He's a 10-mana 5/6 beast with Rush. And whenever this attacks, draw a beast and gain its stats. So whenever there is an important distinction, not after. So this will actually gain the attack before the attack resolves. So, you know, if this draws a Mukla or whatever, this is going to be a 15/6 when it connects with that attack. So yes, if your Banjosaur can stick and go face, that's a really, really scary premise. But is it going to stick and go face? You know, you've got this 10-mana card. You're maybe cheating it into play a little bit earlier, but still pretty late in the game, all things considered, like turn 7 or whatever, for the Banjosaur. So I don't think it's very often going to actually connect for multiple attacks. The Rush attack is pretty likely to connect, which could, again, make this really big. But as we've talked, removal is just a little bit too clean and efficient for these sorts of cards to remain giant threats that late in the game, I think, in most cases. So it's one of those scenarios like, yeah, okay, if you're against an aggro deck, yeah, sure, it's going to stick, but you've probably won anyway. No matter what you do at that stage, you're probably beating an aggressive deck. If you're playing a greedier deck where you need these kinds of threats to connect, they're going to have easy answers for this sort of thing, I'm afraid. So it lives in that weird space where it's, again, its value is based on stats, and stat value diminishes throughout the course of the game really rapidly, right? Stats are super good when they come down early. Stats are less valuable when they come down late. You tend to need effects and payoffs and battle cries to be good late in a game. Stats just don't do the work. And this is, again, stats. Now, again, drawing is nice, but this is a 10-mana card. This is really expensive. It has to do crazy stuff to be good. And unfortunately for the Banjosaur, I can't say this for some reason. The Banjosaur, dinosaur, yeah, Banjosaur. Okay, for the Banjosaur, I think it's far too expensive. Zoc Fogsnout is a 2-star card. Free Spirit is a 4-star card. Groovy Cat is a 4-star card. Spread the Word is a 3-star card. MC Blingtron is a 5-star card. Harmonic Hip Hop is a 4-star card. Mic Drop is a 3-star card. Mr. Mukla is a 3-star card. Stranglethorn Heart is a 2-star card. Big Dreams is a 1-star card. Banjosaur is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. The greatest card in the history of Hearthstone here behind me. I want to hear your thoughts on all of these and more. Thanks so much, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.